Welcome back to the game collection. Sea of Stars is incredible. During my playthrough, I experienced waves of nostalgia and elation, but also conflicting emotions that I did not expect. Bewilderment, abandonment, and disappointment. But not in Sea of Stars. It's complicated, so let's dive into it. I am SuperDerek, and this is Sea of Stars. Sea of Stars is an indie RPG from developer Sabotage Studios. It was released in August of 2023 for PC, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch, and the Xbox Series consoles, and is a retro-style, command-based RPG paying clear homage to the classic RPGs I grew up playing on the Super Nintendo. It wears its Chrono Trigger influences on its sleeve most obviously, but also features several nods to other classic games throughout, packaged up neatly in a beautiful presentation that answers the question of how RPGs might look today if polygons never quite caught on. I may be getting ahead of myself though. The game picks up in medias res, as our two protagonists, Valere and Zale, begin to tackle a rite of passage for Solstice Warriors, which acts as a brief tutorial stage for the game's traversal mechanics, running, climbing, traversing cliff faces, jumping down ledges, and some light combat before the game provides a brief bit of lore and backstory for our protagonists and their best friend, Garl. The two Solstice Warriors are embarking on a journey to put an end to the final dweller in the land, evil beings that grow every year before eventually becoming world devourers if left to fester. This journey sends the trio trotting across a fantastical archipelago, fighting hordes of monsters and zombies, getting into cahoots with merry bands of pirates, and exploring all kinds of ruins, caverns, and fortresses. The story told throughout Sea of Stars is the kind of fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants style adventure you can easily lose yourself into for hours at a time. As new events unfold and new objectives are uncovered, the game feels like a marathon of twists and turns, with brief moments of respite by the side of the campfire around your friends. The moments of downtime camping kind of remind me of Breath of Fire 3, allowing you to get a read on your companion's thoughts and state of mind as the story progresses. You can also switch the party leader between Zale and Valere from the camp, and get some extra lore told to you by Teeks, the scholar who unlocks new stories to tell as you collect new artifacts from the world. These little fireside ghost stories are completely optional, but are incredibly entertaining to read along to and flesh out the world in just that little extra bit for those who really want it. The various party members who accompany Valere and Zale create quite the motley crew. The distant assassin girl, Sarai, who attempts to be aloof but cannot help but care. The alchemist Rashan, who cares yet cannot allow himself to interfere with the world. Beast, the beast with unflinching will, and Garl, the warrior cook and best friend with unlimited optimism and positivity. The two Solstice Warriors protagonists, in a way, act as a single protagonist. They are inseparable from each other, want to be helpful, and are unwavering in their sense of right and wrong, and of course, their love of Garl. But throughout the story, the only party member to get a wealth of dialogue, I think, is Garl, which is fine because he's honestly just such a lovable character. However, there were lots of really great characters outside of the main cast who filled in the world with a lot of personality. In particular, the whole pirate crew held my attention every time they were on screen, especially Yolanda. The tale told in Sea of Stars manages to surprise me on a few occasions and left me feeling gutted a time or two by the time the adventure was finally had come to an end, but Sea of Stars is not a particularly dialogue-heavy title. It's not the main focus. It's an upbeat adventure title, not unlike Chrono Trigger, Grandia, or the Lunar games, so the story plays second fiddle to the combat and world exploration. And that's where Sea of Stars shines the brightest, so to speak. Sea of Stars is a command-based RPG. I would say turn-based, but I honestly haven't sorted out how the turn order is calculated just yet. It seems like enemies just kind of attack in whatever order they feel like. I'm sure that there's a rhyme or a reason to it, I just haven't spotted it. Anyway, there are up to 3 party members in your active party during combat at any given point, which can also be switched in and out from the back row as needed. which you may need to do frequently as you work to break the locks on enemies performing special moves to effectively break their concentration. You see, each party member's attacks have different types, whether blunt or slashing damage, or the magic affinity for those attacks such as lunar, solar, arcane, or poison, so switching in characters better suited for breaking those enemy locks is likely to happen very frequently, which accomplishes a couple of pretty ingenious things. First, this encourages the player to actually use all of the party members equally rather than simply relying on a couple of your favorites all of the time. The other thing that this accomplishes is command-based combat that is constantly demanding that the player juggle different objectives. The player must constantly ask themselves, do I need to use attacks that will deal the most damage, or do I want to prevent the enemy from taking a turn by using strategic moves that may deal less damage, or even is it even possible to break this lock in the allotted turns? Because sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's not. And breaking a lock isn't exactly a pass-fail situation either. Even just breaking a couple of parts of that lock can significantly reduce the damage done by a boss's special move by 30% or more. The combat becomes an intricate dance of balancing damage output and managing damage input. The locks themselves are almost mini puzzles for the player to mentally chew on instead of mindlessly mashing the attack button. And even should the player choose to ignore said locks, the game offers extra timing-based bonuses, like from a game like Super Mario RPG, wherein a precisely timed button press can provide an extra follow-up attack for the player or reduced damage taken from an enemy. So the game is effectively giving the player 3 objectives at any given moment during combat: the immediate, timing-based damage bonuses, the short-term special attack lock breaking, and the longer-term encounter itself. This sounds like a lot, and when I tried the demo out last year, it did feel like a lot to take in all at once. This is definitely the kind of RPG combat that did not translate well to a demo experience. However, as the game itself actually spoon-feeds the combat features to the player piece by piece over a series of hours, it all makes sense and feels a lot less complicated in the heat of battle, and instead just feels like a fully engaging mental workout that feels strategic and tactile. What's also so dang satisfying about the combat is that finally, after 20 years, the seamless encounter system of Chrono Trigger has been fully replicated, meaning that there is no such thing as a battle screen in Sea of Stars. Combat takes place on the same world map you were exploring moments ago. No transition when you get near an enemy on the world map, the party members just spread out and combat has started. It is seamless, and I could be mistaken, but this feels like the first time since Chrono Trigger that this has been fully executed in quite this exact way, and the feeling is just so dang slick. Outside of combat, the game is still fun. A lot of the draw for me is the traversal of the world, which in and of itself can feel like tackling a simple maze with various doors to unlock by completing various puzzles that rely on your understanding of the tools the game provides. Beyond the climbing of walls and jumping up and down surfaces and across gaps, the player can also use items that allow them to push blocks or grapple across long distances with definitely not a hookshot. And fans of Golden Sun will no doubt appreciate the level design and how it was masterfully incorporated with the puzzle design, because just like Golden Sun, solving each puzzle allows you to navigate one step further into the dungeon or environments and feels a lot like untying a knot in a series of knots to untangle. And the level design in Sea of Stars features modern quality of life innovations such as being able to unlock two-way shortcuts for easy ingress or egress should the player desire to exit and return to the dungeon at a later point. It's little things like these that feel incredibly welcome in an RPG that would otherwise feel so comfy and authentically retro-inspired. And just as with combat, the game designers provide the players with several objectives even during traversal of dungeons. Because the player can search for treasure and collectible rainbow conches hidden throughout the world, pro tip, definitely keep your eye out for those, you do want them. Then in the short term, there are the enemies you need to fight along with puzzles to solve, and then the long term is solving the maze and making it to your destination. The layers of gameplay help ensure that the player has something to do, some problem to solve, some knot to untie at all times. However, I do have to knock off some fake points for one aspect, which is that while traversal the first time is such a great experience, traversing these areas again and again while searching for loot and conches and just trying to get from one area to the next can be a real pain. Some of these frustrations are alleviated later in the game, but as someone who did most of my collection hunting before those alleviations were granted, having a way to exit a dungeon quickly and being able to walk through an area on the overworld map once you've traversed it all a single time would have been really a nice feature to have. Another pro tip, maybe don't stress getting all of the rainbow conches until way later in the game. You'll probably know when it's time. Just like how you'll know it's time to play some Wheels every time you enter a new tavern. Wheels is an incredibly addicting minigame that takes place on a clockwork-style table of competitive slot machines. Okay, that sounds incredibly lame, but in practice, it's fun. Think of it like a steampunk-era combat sim. You select two combatants with different stats and abilities and take turns collecting diamonds or squares or hammers to either build up your combatants' attack turns or your defenses, with a goal of depleting the opponent's tower from 10 to 0 points. It sounds complicated, and it is kind of, but because it's a clockwork table, it basically automates all the rules for you. So just play a few rounds and you'll figure it out. It's super fun, and boy, do I wish I had one of these machines in my home. Despite there being a ton of small objectives to juggle at any given moment, the game's difficulty did not strike me as being particularly brutal, which is a good thing in my opinion. From the combat to navigation and puzzle solving, seldom did I feel like I was tempted to look up strategies or guides to make my way further into the game, or through particularly challenging boss fights. Once you've wrangled your mind around the combat system and the abilities that you have access to through the various party members, the difficulty stems mostly from the puzzle-solving elements within combat scenarios. How do I survive this next round best if I cannot break the boss's guard? How can I scrape and scratch my way to the next round when I can pull off a super move? What resources do I still have at my disposal, and how can I leverage them to keep up the fight? To me, the boss fights felt more like endurance runs of combat due to the bosses mainly being hit point sponges with unique abilities and incredible artwork and animations. But in a way, isn't that what boss fights are meant to be? Similarly, the dungeon designs within Sea of Stars are comprised of some symmetrical designs that make navigation of those dungeons feel pretty well intuitive, rather than maze-like. The upshot is that this makes building the shortcuts to the entrance very straightforward, but for people looking for more of a traditional labyrinthine slog through a dungeon, depths may feel underwhelmed. I suppose at the heart of this matter, when it comes to all things retro, is that one man's quality of life improvement is another man's bastardization. That said, I am personally firmly in the camp of loving it. The world presented in Sea of Stars is comprised of beautifully designed pixel art set pieces that feel like they could just as easily be used as pixel art backdrops for Lo-Fi Chiptunes channel on YouTube. So many times throughout the game, I just had to stop playing and appreciate the attention to detail of the living, breathing, waving and swaying pixels that make up the foliage swaying in the wind. The game oozes charm and a certain level of dimensionality that you don't often get from pixel art throwback RPGs. There are plenty of towns and dungeons to explore in the game, and yet despite exploring each to the fullest, I find myself wishing that there was more to explore, more to do. The character art and animation is probably what first drew me into Sea of Stars when I first saw its trailer, what feels like years ago. And the fluidity of movement and the quality of the animation included were phenomenal. Movement feels weighty. The animators were clearly thinking about the art and principles of animation and not simply about how one body part moves from point A to point B in order to make sword swing go and arc. One of the visual tricks that I noticed that developers did to really emphasize the magic inherent within the Solstice Warriors is giving off each of them a glow emanating from each of them. Upon nearing an object, the environment, such as a chair or a wall or a couch or a rock, the sides of those objects will catch that light being emanated, whereas the tops of those objects will remain unlit, which further enhances the feeling of that never-fading light being real, and also further providing that dimensionality to their 2D environments. It's impeccable, and I think it has moved my personal bar for pixel art in video games for the first time since probably Breath of Fire 4 for PlayStation. I am in awe of what this team was able to accomplish. The world explored within Sea of Stars has a lot of variety, though I did notice that the story lingered in particular within some of the gloomiest settings that the game has to offer. And while I get it, you can't have a good story without conflict, part of me wishes that the game would have spent even more time in the sunlight, or moonlight as it were, within even more beautiful renditions of natural environments. Though as an added bonus, the game eventually giving the player control over the day-night cycle goes a long way toward making the environments we get to explore continue to feel new and everlastingly jaw-dropping. Musically, this game answers the question of, what if this game could sound as good as it looked? The answer is a ton of original songs that mesh with the game's world and themes seamlessly, and a smattering of absolutely incredible standouts. In order to make Sea of Stars sound every bit as authentic to a 16-bit era of RPGs that inspired it, the team was even able to employ the legendary Yasunori Mitsuda himself of Chrono Trigger fame among countless others to create some new tracks that were appropriately retro RPG inspired. After completing everything that this game has to offer, Sea of Stars felt like an incredible experience. It wrapped up offering me a chance to play again in New Game Plus, but I'm feeling pretty well satisfied at this point, without really a strong sense of desire to play through it again just yet though. But New Game Plus is a nice feature to have for anyone who still can't get enough. I did encounter a bug during my playthrough that caused the game to lock up following an extended cutscene after a mid-game boss fight, so hopefully the patches coming out for Sea of Stars will address that on all affected platforms. In the meantime though, I would recommend saving often, because even though the game will make checkpoints for you at certain times, they cannot be loaded to from the main menu. So after this glowing review, pun intended, why does Sea of Stars give me such conflicting emotions? It's because the game delivers on everything I've wanted in an RPG since I first played Chrono Trigger years and years ago. It's just so damn good. But why though? What is it about Sabotage Studios that has allowed them to make such an incredible game when the studios I've been looking to for all these years have not even come close to recapturing that magic? Sea of Stars is magical, and Sabotage Studios deserves the accolades that they will no doubt receive for this, dare I say, modern retro RPG masterpiece. And I think that it's also another small cut among 1,000 others that is slowly killing my enthusiasm and hope for RPGs from certain developers who popularized the genre in the first place. It's a bitter feeling, but it's one that is also sweet. If Sabotage Studios and Sea of Stars represent what a new era of the genre that I love could look like, then perhaps it's time to pass the torch to the modern indies who will lead the way from here on out.